Hello. I think many of you have had a quick change from your previous session. I know I have, and I think we'll have a few more people that are going to be jumping over from their prior sessions. I hope you've had a great morning so far. I should say, it's morning here in the United States, but I know for some of you now it is already the evening. So I hope you've had a great day. I do want to give you a quick reminder of just a couple of housekeeping items. That first of all, there is a chat button. And when you click on chat, that is a way for you to chat with any of the attendees. Everyone will see that. And then there is a questions and answers button that is only seen by the moderator and the presenter. So that's a great place for you to ask any questions, and we'll be watching for your questions to come in there. And then if you're in need of translation services, if you click the Wordly button, and then you'll select your language, and then let's see if there's the other thing I wanted to mention is that you can expand your window. So you do see a slide window, and Sharon has some great slides for you. But if you would also like to see a bigger picture of Sharon as she's presenting, you're able to change the size of your video window. So those are the housekeeping items. I do want to just first of all thank Sharon Neumann for joining us today. She also led one of our small group discussions yesterday afternoon. And Sharon is, for many of you who've been in the community, you've known Sharon, and I'll let you tell you a little bit about her connection, because I know she's got a slide about her connection to the community. But we're also fortunate, not only does she understand FOP, but Sharon is a grief and loss specialist. And whether you're a person living with FOP, whether you're a family member, or even a friend of someone living with FOP, the course of the disease experiences a lot of change and some feelings of loss. And so this session is a great opportunity for you to think through those emotions and for also Sharon to give you some strategies as you go through that process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's so wonderful to be here. And thank you, everybody, for joining this session today. I'd like to thank also the IFOPA and all the families that make these types of events possible, as well as the sponsors, and a special warm welcome to anyone who's new to the community. You found a warm, loving, caring place to be, and I think you'll discover that if you haven't already, very quickly. So professionally, I'm a certified senior program manager, and I'm an advanced grief recovery specialist. I haven't always specialized in that. So I come to my profession after years of working in loss and injury and disability, advocating for FOP patients and all kinds of other people around the world. My most recent background is establishing a huge bereavement program for our local hospital system, which serves 23 counties, 8 hospitals. And over these last 5 years, I've worked with over 10,000 individuals and organizations, and then privately with others, either individually or with groups or organizations with loss and change. And I came to this because of my experience with FOP. So Nancy Sando is my sister. Nancy is a co-founder of the IFOPA. As her older sister, she and I have been living with FOP in our lives for over 50 years. Way back when Nancy was working to organize the IFOPA, I had completed a little independent research project on 40 or so FOP patients. I had questions. I had so many questions I wanted to have answered. And actually, to this point in time, we had never met anyone in person who had FOP. So Nancy and I were busy advocating for patients with FOP. We had the opportunity to do that. And I remember flying into Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with my little research project in hand at the encouragement of another physician friend who said we need to talk with Fred Kaplan, because we were wanting to get the medical community and research community interested in adopting the FOP family. So the history of that is we had some really lovely meetings, and it didn't take much persuasion, but Dr. Kaplan said yes to adopting the FOP family and took them in his loving, caring arms, and the rest is history. That's why we're here today. So we organized the first IFOPA meeting at UPenn, and I actually had some interaction with people in Europe who were interested in organizing. I don't know if anyone's here who was at that initial meeting in Germany. It was a lovely get acquainted that provided us with a tremendous amount of information to move us forward towards expanding our family and welcoming more people into the loving arms that we were creating. And what happened was that everybody became involved as we hoped, and here we are. Not too long after that, my sister met her husband, Andy, who has had FOP, and Andy made a significant contribution to the research by donating his bone marrow at the time of his death. It was not a hard decision for him or the family to make. Of course, he wanted to contribute. And to his credit and in his memory, the research continues, and his donation of his bone marrow with live stem cells contributed to the discovery of the gene that forms the basis of a lot of the research that's going on and leading us ever closer to that cure we all want to see happen. And I have a lovely family, including Nancy and my children and my husband, and I love to garden and paint. And you'd think that living with FOP for over 50 years would mean that we're not happy people, that life has been too difficult. But I'm here to tell you that even with all the loss and change that we've dealt with, that includes not only Andy's death and all the changes Nancy's challenged by with FOP, but other loss in our lives and the regular losses and changes we all go through in life. But we are happy and we do enjoy life. And the secret to that has been learning how to embrace the change and the losses and come to a place of acceptance and being able to move forward. So today, we're going to learn a little bit about how we normal human beings respond in a normal way to loss. And as we go through this, we'll begin learning about how we take these threads of change in our lives and all these other experiences and weave them together into a meaningful purpose. And because Nancy and I have lived with this for 50 years, and she has her own story to tell, I'm not going to tell her story. I'll tell you from my perspective. But we'll be including part of our story as we have this learning experience together. So let's start at the beginning. Our family had recently moved from Michigan to Connecticut when this photo was taken. I'll try to click on it and see what happens. So this is a picture of Nancy and I. We recently moved from Michigan to Connecticut when this photo was taken. In 1961, President Kennedy had begun a dramatic expansion of the United States space program. And My dad was an aerospace engineer, and we were very excited to be moving to Connecticut because he was leading a team of engineers to get men to the moon. So it was an exciting time. Our family was going to be part of winning that race to space and landing on the moon. And so Nancy and I were very happy and excited about the move, along with our parents and our brother. And you'll see in the picture, my mom liked to dress us as twins, even though we were more than a year apart. That was something she continued for a long time. And at this point in time, when we moved to Connecticut, which was 1,000 miles away from any of our other family and friends, FOP was not part of our lives. But as winter gave way to spring that year, and spring to summer, our family would experience the first in a series of unexpected, dramatic events and changes. So change is something that we're going to talk a lot about, and change is something that I think most everyone here is used to in the FOP community. FOP, by its very nature, makes us experts at dealing with change. So what was happening at that time is we were settling in and really enjoying our new home in Connecticut, and my dad was really happy with his job. Mom was making friends, as were we. And one hot, sticky, and particularly fun evening, we were catching fireflies and playing tag with our friends under the streetlights. And our mother called us indoors when it came time. And she was a little bit angry, but also amused to see we were covered with dirt and tar from playing barefoot on the street and lawns with the kids in the neighborhood. Mom brought Nancy to the bath first. She told me to sit still on the tile floor in front of the television until it was my turn for a bath. And that was the moment before everything changed. Suddenly, my mother screamed out in a very frightening scream to my father. And the next thing I knew, they were running out the door. They had Nancy wrapped in a blanket. And my brother and I were left to fend for ourselves. My parents said, "John, take care of your little sister." So that was the beginning. That was the moment our family life changed. So because we're experts at change, and I'm sorry that you can't see this slide, I will try to get it. Hopefully you can see that. Looks like it's okay. You know, we're experts at change. First, we resist it. Then we go into this chaotic period, which we were in suddenly. And then we become more accepting, and we begin to transform as we're dealing with all this sudden and widespread change in our lives. Then we integrate it, and we get to a new status quo, is what the illustration shows. But something that people don't understand, because we don't talk about it enough, is that when we go through change, whether it's big and monumental like FOP, or perhaps less significant, as human beings, we always have an emotional reaction to change. And these emotional reactions, whether they're big or small, trigger feelings. And the feelings related to change are what we call grief. And grief is the normal and natural internal response to change in behaviors and change in the patterns of living. So grief is an internal response, not just to death, which most people think of when you hear the word grief, but it's in response to change. So what are some of the change events that might trigger an emotional reaction that we would call grief? So of course there's death. There could be a divorce, beginning or end of a relationship, moving, changing jobs or schools, getting married, having children, or deciding not to have children, an empty nest, retirement, even financial loss or gains cause change. Other types of change, if we've experienced abuse or neglect, either physical, mental, emotional, or sexual, we can have a response that's similar to grief. We've lost our sense of trust and safety in the world. And the same thing can happen with assault, robbery, and illness and injury or disability. If someone betrays us, any kind of traumatic experience, maybe we have chronic pain, or our favorite pet died. Any kind of unexpected life circumstance or change in our role in a relationship will bring this emotional reaction that we call grief. And right now, the whole world's grieving. We have COVID-19 we're dealing with on top of everything else. So that's a grief we're all sharing, even though we're experiencing it in different ways. And of course, with COVID, we're also seeing political changes. At the same time, we're worried about our environment and our planet. So I think you're getting the idea that any type of loss or change that we are dealing with in our lives, especially if it's unexpected, will trigger an emotional reaction. That's the internal response to grief, which we call grief. And grief is unique to every individual. It's not something that any one person experiences the same or needs to process in exactly the same way as anyone else. No two people, even in the same family, will have the same response to a change event. Many factors contribute to the individual response. So it's important, what we know as grief specialists and what we try to teach people and help them understand is how important it is for each person to have their own response and be allowed their own response to change, not try to have someone react to it the same way we do, even though the same person in our family might have a different reaction than us. We have to allow everyone to have their own reaction to whatever the change is. And understanding that allows us to be helpful to each other on what can be a really challenging and difficult journey. For instance, that night when we were catching fireflies and we came inside and the world changed in that instant. It was the same event, but it translated into different types of reactions throughout our family. And I'll just use Nancy and my experience as an example. So this very same event, FOP made its presence known. Well, Nancy's experience was that she was hospitalized for 40 days with my mother staying at her bedside the whole time. She was poked and prodded and had unwarranted painful procedures that we now know shouldn't be done on children or anyone with FOP. She went through rapid, incredible body changes and was experiencing intractable pain. And of course, she would be having a big, strong emotional reaction to all of this sudden change in her life. Can you imagine how confusing that was and how frightened she might have been? And my mother too. On my end, I was at home under the care of my 12-year-old brother for 40 days. My father continued working. There was no such thing as FMLA then. He had to keep things going in his department, leading all the other engineers. So my brother and I were all on our own. It wasn't intentional, but we were alone. We were neglected. We were hungry sometimes. There wasn't always food because everyone's assumed we were okay. And of course, I was having my own set of emotions that I was dealing with. I didn't know what was going on. It was very confusing. I knew everyone was upset around me, but no one was talking with me about it, or my brother. we were in different schools, so he would go his way and I would go mine. And so that experience was quite different. So perhaps some of you have already been thinking about what it was like the moment FOP came into your life, and are thinking about how it was probably a different experience for each one of you and your family. And that would be normal. So finally, after many tests and procedures, Nancy was eventually discharged from the hospital with a misdiagnosis of terminal cancer. The doctors advised my parents to celebrate Christmas early to create a good family memory, since Nancy was not expected to survive until the holidays. So now we kind of had a feeling of what we were dealing with, what was going to happen, but we were preparing for Nancy to die. And we call this in our field anticipatory grief. So the emotions hadn't let up yet, and life was really going to change. We thought for the worse. So when we're having all these feelings, we can think that something's wrong with us, because these emotions are so powerful. And it's hard to feel our feet on the ground or function in our regular day-to-day routine, because our routine's been thrown out the window. But the truth is, there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with anyone who's grieving. A person who is grieving does not need to be fixed. A person who's grieving needs to have their feelings acknowledged with loving understanding and without any judgment or criticism. We need that care and support and the ears and the arms of the people who care about us, so that we can express how we're feeling. And the other thing is that, what we don't talk about is that all people grieve. We went through that long list of some of the things that can cause change in our lives and a grief reaction. We just don't talk about it very much. At least now, though, with COVID, grief does seem to be a topic that people want to talk about and learn from, and learn how to be there for each other. So perhaps we're entering a time where grief is not going to be as neglected and misunderstood a process as it has been. And perhaps now we're going to be able to share the tools that we have. People who are like me in this occupation, help people have the tools to deal with and complete our grief. Because we're often provided misinformation about grief and loss beginning in early childhood and throughout our lives. For instance, I'll just reflect back on my own experience, and I'm sure Nancy has a collection of these experiences. People are uncomfortable around us when we're hurting emotionally. And so they'll try to, and what we need is to be able to talk about how we're feeling. And what happens is that people will try to cheer us up. Or, my own mother would say, have a cookie and milk, that'll make you feel better. When what we might really need to do is talk with each other, among other things. So we have this misinformation. And what compounds the problem with this lack of knowledge about how to help each other is there's confusion about stages in grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, some of you may have heard of her, she did some wonderful work about grief in people who are dying and these stages that we go through in grief. And it's very accurate and it's very wonderful, but it's applicable to people who are dying, not to people who are living with grief. And there's a whole other course about understanding that. But there are confusions about stages. Grief does not follow a straight line. It doesn't have a particular path it's going to follow for each or any person. And we don't really get over grief. We learn how to live with grief and complete any pain that's with it when we have the right kind of support, so that we do have room for joy in our lives. And I'm a big subscriber to the belief that our joy is our sorrow unmasked. And when we complete our grief, we have room for joy. We have to remember that all relationships are unique, and therefore all recovery is individual, but that's not hasn't been the general thinking. And again, we're ill prepared to deal with loss because we don't teach about this or learn about it except by chance and by our own experiences in our family. And so we're ill prepared to help each other. And the most important thing is that we haven't learned how to mourn or express our internal grief and emotional energy outside ourselves, which is what is required to heal those holes we have in our heart when we're dealing with these big changes. So this is something I really wanted to talk with you about today because it's so relevant to the FOP community. Emotional energy. So this emotional energy that we have, that is our bucket of grief inside ourselves, needs a way out. If that just sits inside, it just grows and grows and grows, and it will sometimes will naturally find a way to express it that's healthy, but a lot of times we don't. So I'm going to bring you back to a moment in our childhood when very instinctually I took my emotional energy and went through a mourning process, which was actually a very healthy thing for me to do. As painful as it is to hear about it, it was a very healthy and healing thing for me to do. So I'm 7 years old. Nancy's in the hospital. Our parents are nowhere to be seen. I'm under the care of my 12-year-old brother who's going through his own chaotic emotional experience. And so during those long, lonely, hungry days when Nancy and my mom were in the hospital, and I had no one to talk with about what was happening and all the confusing feelings I was experiencing, it came to points where sometimes I felt like I might explode. And when those feelings overwhelmed me, just instinctually, I would run into the woods. Fortunately, we lived in a beautiful area where I could go to a place that was lovely. We'll run around on those pathways. And there, in nature's arms, I found a sense of peace and comfort while taking long walks along the trails around Lake Mohegan that eventually led up along the banks of the Mill River. And after a while, my legs would feel tired, and I'd rest on my favorite spot. It was upstream on a ledge of rock that was just beautiful. And there, the river flowed through a narrowing that formed a series of small cascades, little waterfalls and pools. And I'd sit there for hours in the sun, or sometimes it would be raining, and I'd talk it out. Everything that I was feeling with the fish and the birds. I'd cry. And sometimes I'd cry out to an invisible God whose reassurance and reliable presence I didn't really know well, but I would come to know. Instinctually, I was reaching out. And so I leaned into that loving strength I felt in that nature around me. And that became my sacred place, and I would go there often. No one told me to do that. That was very instinctual. Interestingly, though, when I would try to talk with the adults in my life, I was given a cookie. So what I was seeking from the adults in my life, I wasn't getting, but I did get it from nature. And I'm grateful for that. Tears are something we should talk about. Tears come pretty naturally too, and you might surprise you to know that tears are nature's remedy. Sometimes we're embarrassed about crying, but crying is one of the healthiest things we can do to process that emotional energy that just builds up. And the author here, I found a reference to tears, and she says very perfectly that tears are our body's release valve for stress, sadness, grief, anxiety, and frustration. Also, you can have tears of joy, say, when a child is born, or tears of relief when a difficulty has passed. And this psychologist, and many of us agree with her, that we should try to let go of any outmoded, untrue conceptions about crying, because it's good to cry. It's healthy to cry. This helps to emotionally clear sadness and stress. It's an essential part of resolving our grief to cry. It helps us process the loss so we can live with open hearts. So you get rid of all that emotional energy, and then your heart's open and your body's open to experience life more joyfully. I'm probably speaking to the choir here. You've probably discovered this. You need to know it's okay and that you have friends here. So if you feel like you don't want to cry alone, you can reach out to any of us. Another part of healing I wanted to talk about was how we move towards reconciliation. And we've already talked about that a little bit. We come to reconciliation in our grief journeys when the full reality hits us. When it becomes a part of us, we come to acceptance, okay, this is how life is going to be now. And to get to reconciliation, beyond working through it intellectually, there's also an emotional and spiritual working through we need to do. Because what had been understood at the head level now has to be understood at the heart level. Our head is 14 inches above our heart. So just because we've thought it through intellectually, okay, this is going to be okay, this is how we're going to do it, we still have to do the heart work. And the heart work is sometimes harder than the head work because we haven't become practiced at it. But this heart work that we need to do comes with talking it out, writing it out, crying it out, and thinking it out. Then expressing ourselves by playing it out, painting, sculpting, flower arranging, dancing, singing. You get the idea. We need to express what we're feeling. And these can be actually very beautiful expressions, as you'll see. We come to reconciliation sometimes by chance, more often by intention. And what we need to do, and I won't read everything on here, but with FOP, we have to adjust to a new normal over and over and over again. And so that requires us to do this process of descending into our feelings and expressing them, maybe more often than other people. But that's okay. It's a beautiful thing. And it's really, really important to learn our own process of acceptance and what works for us. And there's some wonderful material out there. This is one book by Daniel Miller, The Gifts of Acceptance, Embracing People and Things as They Are. And there's a huge collection of books on the subject. And I would encourage you to seek them out as you're learning and finding your own way of what works for you. So when the familiar fabric of our life unravels, it takes time to weave these threads together into a new way. You might find that you've been teeter-tottering between emotions, working towards your reconciliation, and that's okay. It's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. We're going to have good days and bad days. It's a normal response to change. One parent, Emily Kingsley, wrote about this, and I like to share this with my clients if they haven't heard about it already. But she was a writer for Sesame Street. She has a child with Down syndrome, and she liked to relate her experience through this story. It's like I'm just going to read this to you because it's so important. She says, "Welcome to Holland. I'm often asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability, to try to help people who have not shared that unique experience to understand it, to imagine how it would feel. Well, it's like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks and make wonderful plans, the Colosseum, the Michelangelo, David, the gondolas in Venice. You may learn some handy phrases in Italian. It's all very exciting. And after months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, the plane lands, and the stewardess comes in and says, 'Welcome to Holland.' 'Holland,' you say? 'What do you mean, Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my life I've dreamed of going to Italy.' But there's been a change in the flight plan, and you've landed in Holland. And you discover over time that Holland isn't such a bad place. In fact, it's a lovely place, and there are lovely people. And yeah, you didn't get to go to Italy, but Holland's nice, and you like it there. And your other friends might still be going to Italy and coming back and telling about their trip. But it's okay. Holland is okay. And for FOP, we have this incredible global community. And even if you're new to FOP and new to the IFOPA and the support that exists around the world, you need to know that this is a good place. There's loving, caring, wonderful people here, and we're all here to help in any way we can as we all are on this journey together. And as part of going through this reconciliation process and acknowledging feelings, it's important for us to learn how to acknowledge our feelings, to express our feelings as we've talked about. It's good to think about at least one or two people that are your safe people to share your feelings with as they come up. Choose those who will listen and acknowledge your experience in a loving way, without any judgment, criticism, and or especially unwanted advice. We so want to give advice when someone's hurting, but the most important thing we can do is listen. You could join a support group, or you could work individually with a professional. Groups and professionals can be very helpful if you've hit a rough spot and you need to sort things out and you don't want to burden your husband or wife or child or parents. Reaching out beyond your own family can be a really important thing to do. And let this part of your experience in accepting change as you teeter-totter back and forth between your emotions, let that be okay with you. It's part of your experience. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. There's everything right about owning it. And always keep in mind that grief, which is an adjustment to change, is a matter of the heart, not the head. So you've got to feel your way through it. You've got to feel it and express it. As they say, feel it to heal it. So I'll share an experience. What happens is, Nancy and I were getting the cookies. People were trying to cheer us up all the time. So when we hit a spot in our late 20s, we hadn't been really honest about how we'd been feeling. She had recently become a full-time wheelchair user. She and I shared a home. She didn't live with our parents. We lived together. And due to her injuries and the complications of the FOP, she had to give up her computer programming business. Her care needs had increased. Her physical pain was difficult, sometimes impossible to manage, and her independence had taken a huge blow. I was heartbroken for her, and I was doing everything I knew to help and to advocate for her. And at the same time, I was exhausted by the added time each day spent caregiving and advocating. These changes that were affecting Nancy were also affecting me on a lot of levels. But we were, because of what we learned in childhood, to keep that smile on our face and to, have a cookie if you're feeling bad. We weren't really being honest with each other emotionally. We were dealing with what had to be done in a very effective way. But because of what we'd learned from our family and society, we weren't being honest about how we were feeling, and that was going to come out. We call that in our profession Academy Award performing. We pretend like everything's all right when it doesn't feel all right. We say I'm fine when we're not feeling fine. We put on a happy face when we're not all that happy. Or we work to be fine for our family and friends. Or we decide we want to help others. And all of that is all good in doses. However, if we're not being honest. So what happened with Nancy was we were sitting in the van one day and getting ready to go and do our work. And she said, it finally came out. She said, I can't do this anymore. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I just can't do it, any of it. I'm at the end. I'm at the end of my rope. And I said, you know what? I am too. And that was the first time we had been honest with each other. And then we had a beautiful, beautiful emotional conversation full of tears and hugs. And we emptied that emotional bucket. And that was so important. But we hadn't been talking to each other for years. We would have been better off to have learned ways to communicate with each other about our emotional well-being and feelings. But now we do. And that was an important lesson to learn. Facing emotional pain can be an unfamiliar experience for all of us, and even scary because we haven't been taught how to handle that. But so being supported by a professional for a small period of time even, or turning to those people you have identified as your safe people where you can talk about how you're really feeling is so important. And I can't underestimate, as this cartoon illustration shows us, how important it is to just wrap each other in love whenever we can. Sometimes there are no words. Sometimes we just need to hold each other. It's a beautiful thing. I miss those hugs during COVID. And we have to always also look at what's good in our lives and in ourselves. We all have gifts. We all have treasures. We have to feed ourselves with hope. The IFOPA does a wonderful job of helping us do that. We also have to feed it with truth. What's the truth of our lives? We also have to feed ourselves and those around us with love. Caring is part of the cure, after all. And looks like we're running short on time, so I won't go through all of this, but there's value in honoring our entire life experience and where we are now, and reaching out to others and contributing our gifts, whatever our gifts are, to our community. And this leads us to talking a little bit about directing our emotional energy positively, or emotional energy positively directed, as I like to say. All we have to have is a loving heart, and share that in whatever way we can. It gives our life value and purpose, and it can even change the world. For instance, when Nancy couldn't do all those things that she was used to doing when things became more complicated, she was going crazy, and she taught herself to knit. And that knitting became a big project that she's been doing for years and years and years now. She knits these beautiful whimsical hats for newborns at our local hospital, and everyone looks forward to those. And she's created all kinds of wonderful friendships around that, and helped a lot of people with their own sense of loss too, because she also knits special hats for newborn angels. She and I both facilitate support groups. We do a lot of volunteering. That gives our lives meaning and purpose. We even get involved on a local and national government level on issues that affect people with disabilities, not just FOP, but the whole world of people with disabilities, because some of the things that affect us, families dealing with FOP, affect lots and lots of people who are dealing with mobility or other kinds of issues related to disease and disability. Other examples of people who have taken emotional energy and turned it into something that had a global impact. I think we're all familiar with the Me Too movement. Survivors of sexual assault found each other and created this whole movement Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, grieving the death of their family members caused by drunk drivers, united and changed the laws so we don't have as many drunk drivers on the road anymore, because it affected their movement. Their emotional energy was directed towards changing the laws. And that's had a tremendous impact on the world. The Never Again movement by teenagers who saw their classmates die in shootings. And of course, who doesn't love Greta, the climate activist who's trying to change the world? And one voice, your voice matters. Maybe you don't have a big army of people around you yet, but if you have an idea and you have a voice you can lend to change, you can change something in your home, your neighborhood, your community, or even the world. And of course, Malala, we know how much she's done for women's education, and even was awarded the Nobel Prize for her work. In the FOP community, there have been efforts that Nancy and I have been involved in that affected the recall of defective wheelchair lifts, saving lives and injury. Many different organizations with disabilities we've been involved in and lent our voice to. And of course, Andy's donation of bone marrow at the time of his death. To him, contemplating that donation was, I can be part of making the world better for people with FOP and bone diseases all over the world. So that was an example of his use of his emotional energy that's affected every one of us that's here today. And emotional energy of our collective community gave birth to the IFOPA and all the national organizations and the army of researchers around the world who've been moved and feel that emotional energy and are helping us. And of course, most recently, Tin Soldiers and our mission to get out there and find other families so that they're not alone, so that they can be part of this family that we're all enjoying. So you're not alone. None of us are alone. Sometimes it can feel like we're alone. If we admit it, we've felt that way, each one of us, and that's not a good place to be. I'm glad that we're all here together and that we can reach out to others and reassure each other that we're not alone. And on the other side of that, we always have to help others and allow them to help us. We give help, we also need to receive help. If we're just giving, and not accepting the help that we need, we're going to run out of gas. So if we're hurting, our emotional bucket is full and we're not sure what to do, this is just a reminder. If your tooth ached, you'd see a dentist, right? If your arm were broken, you'd probably see an orthopedic doctor and get that fixed. But if your heart's hurting, if your emotional bucket is feeling a little more full than usual, you could talk with someone in your family or your friends. There's always somebody who's going to understand. You could reach out to your family doctor and say, I need to talk with somebody, or your school counselor. You could talk with somebody like me. There's 100 of us or so around the world that do this kind of work. You could take these threads of your life, the darker threads, the more painfully colored threads, along with the joy, weave them together. Become part of the community. Create this beautiful tapestry that we enjoy in the FOP community. Be a part of it. And be a part of weaving your own tapestry of life that's filled with the colorful experiences and gifts that you have. Use that emotional energy to power you for good. Good in your own life, good in your family life, being there for each other, becoming part of the community. Know that you're loved. I love each and every one of you. I love everyone that's part of this community, and I know they love me back. And my family loves you, and we know you love us. There's lots of pictures of us having fun. FOP is a tough game, guys, but we've got it. We've got this. We've got each other's backs. And I do this today and on other occasions in memory of my mother, who lived just long enough to see the beginnings of the IFOPA. She's someone like every mother out there and father who spent her life looking for a cure. And when she died with the hope that, oh my gosh, we're really on a track. It's going to happen. So thank you, Mom, who was an activist in her own right, who trained us well. If you're looking for some materials that can help you, I've attached a listing of programs that I do. I highly recommend When Children Grieve, either as a program that you can do with a grief recovery specialist, or just read it on your own. It will help you interact with your children in a positive, healthy way. And there's a million books out there, but these are some of my favorites. One is a daily journal for meditations to invite the positivity into your life, help you stay focused while also acknowledging, some of those more difficult feelings that we have. Many of these you've probably heard of. When bad things happen to good people, that's been around for a long time, but it's still a great book. And then to have a conversation with your kids about change in life, I really love sharing this wherever I go. These are links to videos of a monarch caterpillar going into a chrysalis form, and then another video of that same chrysalis emerging, the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. It's a great way to have a conversation with your children about change. And I want to thank my daughter, Renee, for capturing that video. So we went a few minutes long, unfortunately, because of the slide difficulty in the beginning, but there's the message I wanted to communicate with you today. And if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. And I'm looking to see, I have to refresh to get to questions to see if there are any. Okay, questions, answers.
Yeah, there was a question. Sharon, thank you so much, first of all, for just really sharing
You're welcome.
Experience. There was a question about someone had, how does one solicit your grief services? And I kind of have an extension of that. You said, I think you said there's 100 hospitals in the world that offer this, which doesn't seem like very many.
Well, they're individuals. Yeah.
Right. How do you find someone in your community? First of all, let's talk about how are people able to solicit your services? Yes, but if they want to find someone in their local community, how would they go about finding someone that can help them?
So you can Google grief recovery method, and that will bring you to the website, and you'll be able to identify someone in your country or region who does the work. Okay. And of course, if you wanted to work with me, Michelle knows how to get a hold of me. I think I had the slide up there, or you can email me anytime. I guess I could put that slide up that has my contact information.
Yeah, that'd be great. There it is.
There. So that's how you can reach me. And we'll have a nice conversation if you reach out to me. I'd look forward to that.
Any other questions? It's fine that we've run a few minutes over. We've got some time before the next session starts. So if there's any other questions, pop those in the Q&A.
Okay. I do have, some added comments from myself. I rewatched the Tin Soldiers film, and I love what Ian had to say. Ian Kelly said, I could have let FOP define me, but I don't look at FOP as an invader. FOP is just trying to heal my body, and it's kind of screwed up. There is so much more to me than FOP that I'm just not going to, I'm going to adapt to the changes. I'm going to work on my computer apps and music. And he's involved in life. He's discovered other parts of himself that he really enjoys. And I thought that was pretty profound, that FOP is definitely a part of my life, but it doesn't define who I am. And that's a good thought to keep in mind.
Good reminder.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, everybody.
I think those are our questions for now. So thank you so much, Sharon, for being with us yesterday and then again today. We are so
You're welcome.
It's fun to hear the stories about how the IFOPA was started and the things that happened in the very beginning. And
yeah, I'm sorry it was a little bumpy in the beginning. The slide not working kind of threw me off a little bit.
We enjoyed listening to you. Well, everyone, thank you so much for being here. Let me just give you a reminder of what happens next. So in the next 20 minutes from now until then, we'll have a break time. If you have kiddos, there is a kids contest that's going to be happening in 20 minutes. So you'll want to be a part of that. And then the next thing will happen is our topical discussion groups. And those will kick off in about 1 hour. And the choices that you can pick from are adaptive tool use and home adaptation problem solving. So that will be led by community members, but also with Karen Kirchhoff on the IFOPA's team. There is a session that Hope Newport is going to run on implementing self-care and protecting your emotional health. That's part of our resilient living program. There's a great session if you are interested in fundraising, and it's going to actually be led by a panel of FOP families on virtual fundraising for the IFOPA. And then there will be 3 sessions on FOP management and resources, one for children, one for adults in their 20s, and then one for adults over the age of 30. And again, those will all be led by community members. So you'll just go to the theater, and then you'll select the link for the topical discussion group you want to be a part of. And then don't forget, tonight is the Share Your Strength Talent Show. So you can find the instructions on that and the photo booth in the email you should have received early this morning. I think I sent it out at 4 a.m. Eastern time. So go look for that email, and that'll give you the instructions for the rest of the day. Okay, thank you again, Sharon, and we will see you all soon.